And that's you live, thank you.
Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Social Work Services Committee. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available on the Council's website for public viewing. Remote participants, please follow the good practice guide, which includes muting microphones and switching off your video when you are not addressing the meeting, writing speak in the Teams chat function when you want to contribute. If you are in the hall, you can do this on your iPad, laptop or phone. Please don't repeat contributions already made by other members. No material should be posted in the chat function if it is intended as part of the discussion. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be taken under roll call. If any members has to leave the meeting, please either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time or write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you rejoin the meeting, just so that we can keep track of whether the meeting is correct. All members should speak clearly, taking their time and speaking directly into the microphone when making contributions. When referring to reports, please provide reference to the relevant page and paragraph to allow everyone to follow. Please focus contributions on areas where clarification is required or to purpose an alternative to a recommendation. Before we move to the agenda, I want to make a couple of announcements. Firstly, the Scottish Social Services Awards for 2023 took place on Thursday the 24th of November, and I am pleased to advise members that Laurie Downing was the winner of the Bright Spark in the Social Work Award, and Laurie is here in committee today. Laurie joined social work as a final year student from the University of the West of Scotland in August 2022, tasked with supporting the humanitarian effort to support Ukrainians fleeing conflict. Despite never having worked in the social work settings before, Laurie adapted very quickly. Laurie rallied fellow students to provide Christmas holidays activities for the Ukrainian children. She remotely supported an unaccompanied Ukrainian child to come here to safety, and she also supported a family through war crimes investigations. Laurie has impressed her colleagues and Ukrainian guests with her calm, gentle and unflappable efficiency. As the service was in its infancy, Laurie was pivotal in adapting existing policies to meet the emerging needs. We are very fortunate to be able to offer Laurie a full-time post on her graduation. Laurie is now considering opportunities to use her skills and knowledge to conduct research into best practice approach to supporting vulnerable migrants, using her learning from Dumfries and Galloway as a benchmark. Well done, Laurie. Secondly, I will also want to acknowledge that Lorraine Priestley, who is a senior practitioner occupational therapist, has recently completed 40 years service with the Council. This is a remarkable achievement, and we are honoured and privileged that Lorraine committed her whole career to the occupational therapy services within Dumfries and Galloway Council, and also to the most vulnerable people within our community. Well done, and thank you very much. She's not here. Now we'll move on. Item 1, Sedrant apologies and Chair's approval of members' remote participation. Claire, can you please provide the Sedrant, including any participants remotely and any apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. This morning we have 15 members present. There's 9 in the hall, 6 members currently on Teams, being Councillors Bell, Davis, Ferguson, Ingalls, Little and Young. I've been notified of 3 apologies from the Chair, Councillors Karen Crothers and Councillor Jordan. There's 3 members currently not present, being Councillors Heavy, McFarlane and Wood. Thank you.
Apologies for Councillor Howie. He's attending a public protection meeting, which seems to clash with us. We don't know why.
Thank you, Claire.
And apologies for Councillor McFarlane. He's doing interviews for the Chief Exec job at the NHS.
And also apologies for Councillor Pauline Rysdale, who's unable to attend today.
All noted, thank you.
Thanks, Claire. My agreement to participation of members named as participating remotely. Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Ferguson.
It's historical, sorry.
Item 3, the minute of the previous meeting, the 10th of October 2023. This minute is for approval. Please note that the member seminar, as agreed at 6.3, has been arranged for the 16th of January 2024. Are members happy to approve the minute? Thank you. Item 4, revenue budget. This report presents an overview of the financial performance at the end of quarter 2, the 30th of September 2023, and Janet Sutton is available to answer any questions. Do we have any questions, members? Councillor Dawood.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, and thank you for the report. Quite a concerning one, but very candid, so the Labour Group certainly appreciates that. 1.25 million is indeed a challenging overspend to contend with. I want to talk about 4.1 on page 15 and Appendix 1 on page 19. And we currently have, I know that we currently have one local authority residential unit for children and young people in Dumfries and Galloway, which takes 4, sometimes more people. And we currently have 18 placements with a future estimate of 19.4, which means the majority of our children and young people are potentially placed out with our region. I suspect that's contributing quite a bit to the 1.25 million overspend. Now, we all know that since COVID, there's been an increased demand for placements, and that's at Appendix 2, page 24, for reference purposes, across the fostering and residential categories. And if I'm being honest, it looks like we've been undertaking a watching brief on this. But now things are coming to what could be termed a crisis point, as we're increasingly dependent on external provision out with our region, particularly for residential placements and for some fostering placements as well. That isn't a criticism of the service, it's just an observation on what's been happening over a number of years, probably the past 15 years, which is not a great place to be. I really welcome, and the Labour Group welcome, the fact that reviews being undertaken to identify underlying trends versus short-term pressures. That's page 46. 4.6, page 16. But it does not negate the fact that our residential placements are at an extremely high level, and we believe there's something needs to be done about this sooner rather than later. I did some research into this before coming to talk to this committee. And I understand that much of residential placements are now run by the independent, i.e. the private sector, which was quite a shock to me given my lack of knowledge about social work services prior to coming on to being an elected member. We still have one local authority run residential care or residential place for our children and young people. But I understand also, and this is something that quite astonished me, we have 76 residential beds for children and young people run by the independent sector in Dumfries and Galloway, which we're obviously not using. So can I ask, we'll get to the questions you'll be glad to hear, can I ask how many of these have we procured against those out with Dumfries and Galloway for those that we can't care for internally, and how many children and young people are having to live out with the region? Another question, or maybe a comment, why has this been allowed to happen? I think we can semi-answer that one because we're having to deal with market forces and deregulation, which we've had to do for a number of years, and also a lack of standardisation of fees, maybe something Scottish Government could look at on our behalf, or Scotland Excel could look at on our behalf. So it would be interesting to know how much this council spent in the past 15 years on residential care, both internally and out with in private or independent, shall we say, placements. I suspect we wouldn't argue that our children and young people need the best possible support, and by outsourcing care to private sector providers, are we confident we've done enough in terms of GIRFEC, when arguably proper local facilities would help safeguard our children's futures and create sustainable and fair paid jobs and a local skill base, which is what we need in Dumfries and Galloway. So in light of the above, my final question is one for the Chair in particular. Can I ask that this committee commits, as part of the detailed review, which I've already mentioned at 4.6, page 16, we explore and capture the costings reopening additional local authority residential care facilities in Dumfries and Galloway for our children and young people? Thank you.
The microphone not turning on wasn't deliberate given the extent of the questions and the severity of the information in the report, Councillor Dorwood. Listen, thank you for the comments, the points and the questions, and I've jotted down as many of those as I could, but I might not have done it quickly enough, so please do come back. So in relation to the costings for out-of-agency placements, then that does constitute the bulk of the £1.25 million overspend as stated in the report and as previously reported to the Council. And you're absolutely right that this trend has moved what we would view as in the wrong direction in terms of costs. But the number of placements has varied over those years. And we've got some detailed figures around the last 5 years, and we can certainly extend the look over to 15, but I don't have a response for that today. We've been successful in some initiatives locally to varying degrees. So prior to the pandemic, we had the early intervention through the Family Support Service, which was highly successful. And we reported the cost avoidance in relation to how it was having a positive impact on the number of placements, and more importantly than the number of placements, but children remaining in their own home and in their own community so they can get the best for themselves. And clearly that's what we all want. However, the pandemic did happen. And it had a significant impact. You know, we seen at Education Committee last week where the number of children who were coming, who haven't developed in the same way as their predecessors who were coming into schools, who are presenting different behaviours. We're seeing that across society. And that's where the impact on social work is very significant. So that has impacted to this. And crisis is a strong word, but it's one I've been pondering the last couple of weeks and months in particular, given where we are. And I wouldn't go as far as to say we're at crisis point just yet, but there is a tipping point, and I would say we are fairly close. But that's why the service, along with colleagues in finance and other parts of the council, have been looking at what is it we need to do now and what is it we need to do in the medium and longer term. So Alison Penman's here today, and this may well come up later, but I might also invite Alison to come to the table, just in case she wants to add anything. We're looking at what we know succeeds. So early intervention does. But many of our staff who were doing the early intervention work are now doing crisis intervention to help bring children back to the area. So Alison and her team has been really successful at bringing 2 children back from secure to the family home, which is almost unheard of. But that's pulled staff from other duties to support that. So what's alluded to in this paper, without going into the detail because we're still working it up, is how we can bring in crisis support, early intervention, kinship support. And what's critical about kinship support in this scenario is if we support more kinship carers better than we currently do, we will stop children breaking down and moving into placements. If we can reintroduce, and I use that term deliberately, our early intervention, we can start that, stopping the throughput. The residential figures are interesting because, you mentioned the 76 beds. Only 7 of those have Dumfries and Galloway children in them. We have tried. We've attempted in the past to enter into arrangements with the independent sector about when you've got vacancies coming up, let us know, we'll see if we can match. But they are independent, and by nature they are a business and they run in a business model. So we've been unsuccessful to a degree. So do we need more of our own in terms of residential care locally? The short answer is probably yes, but we need to do the detailed work. We need to see the impact that the shorter to medium term projects, if approved as part of the budget setting process, have an immediate impact. And then we need to look at that longer term in terms of our own residential. But my inkling right now, and my advice right now, if pushed on the point, I would say yes, we need to start planning that. And indeed, the service are looking at that with other colleagues. So the why, I think I've covered some of the why, but not all of it. And we don't have long enough today, I would suggest, to go into the whole debate. Fees, Scotland Excel does set a fee base across, but not everybody buys into that. And this is a horrible phrase I'm about to use, but the childcare market in Scotland is saturated. If you are looking for a residential placement in any part of Scotland from any local authority right now, you're unlikely to find one. And if you do, it will be extremely expensive because it really is a seller's market. And I use those words with hesitancy, but with deliberacy as well, because it is about market forces. Scotland Excel set fees of around about £3,500 per week, Alison. However, The average is significantly higher than that because the providers are saying we need extra support for that child, whatever that child's needs happen to be. So it is extremely difficult. The 15 years one I've addressed. Is there enough going on in Gairfach? Yes and no. We're trying to intervene as early as we possibly can. We're trying to work with colleagues in education as early as we can. But the enormity of children's lives and families' lives right now in terms of the impact of COVID, cost of living, etc., is probably catching up and overtaking to degrees. But again, Alison's leading on some work with colleagues in I say children's services deliberately because it's not just education, it's also health, around how we can get better at Gairfach in localities. Local skill base, I'm a big fan of this, and we're coming on to workforce in a minute. We've done some great work around there, how we can improve that. Equally, if we can bring in, crisis teams, and that's at non-professional level, but overseen by professional social workers, it's increasing the skill base that we know we can attract locally. So we are looking at that, but again, short, medium, and longer-term projects there. Explore costings. I mean, you directed that to the chair. I've probably jumped in and picked it up early enough, Chrissy, but I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add. And hopefully I've picked up most of the questions, Councillor Dorward.
Apologies for the list. We felt, and as a social work spokesperson for Labour, we felt it was important to list these because we do believe we are coming into a crisis, and if we're not there, we're at the cliff edge and about to fall off it in terms of this. And we really need to look hard at what we're doing. But the concern, I think, is the deregulation, the unregulation of service provision that's not provided by local authorities, it's provided by the private sector. It's kind of similar to the care home sector as well in Scotland and across the UK, which is not what we need. So it would be really, I get you doing your review. It might be part of the review, but just to make sure that it is put in as part of that is to look at costings for local authority on residential places. I totally understand preempting that and trying to not have that happen in terms of the early interventions. That's the best way to do it. But if we need to put children and young people into residential places, we do it locally as opposed to across wherever in Scotland there's a place that's not really beneficial for them or for their families, is it? But thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Darwood, for your comments and questions there. Councillor Stevenson, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just on a slightly different matter, on the family placements for fostering. I see that's us lost another 6 existing fostering parents. Is it possible for us to maybe try and arrange some sort of meeting in some sort of working group with some of these people that have deregistered, so us as councillors can see what these issues are, so we can be part of the solution to why these people are now leaving? Thank you.
I could give a very brief response around some of that now. In terms of the age profile of our foster carers, we were anticipating many of those, like most of those 6, leaving the service just in terms of their age and experience and effectively retiring. So we can certainly provide more information and arrange, conversations with the staff. That happens with the carers rather than not staff, my faux pas. So we'll certainly continue to do that and bring the information that they give us about why, so we can continue to try and improve the service.
Yeah, that would be great. We know, well, I know as well, knowing some foster carers, the massive difference you make to these children's lives. So anything we can do to help, I think, is really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, and I mean this very, very genuinely, thanks to all the social work staff. It's a phenomenal challenge you've got and a phenomenal effort that you make. I don't understand half of what you guys see. My only experience is through the school situation, where I know that there's a lot of need there, and so I just want to thank you all for your efforts. Reference in page 16, 4.7, to paraphrase, we're looking at how we can manage the costs. Since I've been on this committee for a year and a half or so, every time we come here, we're challenged by costs, and we look at the contingency plan. And there's an irony here that sometimes we balance the budget because we can't fill vacancies. So we fill the vacancies, you're going to go even more over budget. So to cut to the chase, this is an interdepartmental issue. It's not just social works, it's education, it's E&R, it's absolute communities, it's everything. It reflects the poverty situation, and the subgroup on poverty obviously feeds into it. So what I would like to propose is at 2.3, the recommendations, that part of that recommendation should be, we should be feeding into the budget panel to look at, should this £1 million or whatever be actually part of your budget that you can use proactively, so that you're not looking at necessarily cutting costs, which I'm not against, but we're not reducing investment, because the price we will pay for cutting on investment in social services, and just as importantly, the connectivity between all the services, we will pay in the long term. We need to catch up and be proactive. So I would suggest that the budget that goes onto the budget panel's agenda to look at whether that's contingency or it's in your budget. Thank you.
Thank you there, Councillor Jameson. Stephen, do you want to take that one?
Thank you for the comments, and particularly the thanks to social work staff. And every time I'm in this chamber, elected members always thank the staff, and it's very much appreciated, especially when we see the likes of Laurie sitting here today with a future ahead of her. In relation to the budget panel, this report is very candid, and we are feeding into the budget panel. Myself, colleagues, including Paul Garrett and colleagues in finance and others in social work, have been doing the detailed work together. We are going to... I was asked a very direct question by one of my colleagues in finance and said, Stephen, is this a blip in terms of the overspend? And I said, no, it's not. The overspend in relation to placements right now is a minimum of 2 years because the children are in placement and we can't just move them when they're there. It's also a minimum of 2 years because the pandemic interrupted children's development for 2 years in terms of the actual interruption, but the impact of the interruption will take many children much longer to recover from. So we are actually going to be putting in, this overspend plus some of the costings for the mitigating factors that we want to see into the budget panel process. So that's already in stream, as it were. So hopefully that can give you some comfort, Councillor.
I could ask that to be a matter of urgency. I sit in the budget panel, so it's not even at step one now, and the budget is under pressure now. So if we can speak to the chair of budget panel, the chief executive, there is an urgency here, and social work in many ways underpins. Social work picks up a lot of the, pardon the expression, the debris of everything else. So it's absolutely crucial that it goes at least to step one, so we can move it back to you guys to take it to step two, and then back to this committee to offer some real positive change, so as we can identify all the existential issues that you guys are facing, and how it fits in with education, E&R, communities, all that sort of stuff. It is fundamental that we take this as a matter of priority.
Yeah, that's scheduled for January.
So it should be coming forward in January.
So it should be coming forward in January, thank you. Yeah. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, my remarks follows just what George is saying, and indeed what Linda highlights. And, the comprehensive response has been from Stephen so far, and his reference very candid, the report, but I don't catch the severity of the crisis. And I think crisis was mentioned 4 times from you speaking and indeed Linda speaking. And I say that in terms of 4.1, where it says that the service may overspend to 1.25 million. I would say it will overspend. So it's that may in terms of the crisis that we're in, that language, it changes. The same at 2.3, and Stephen and George has offered up a recommendation under that. I look at this in terms of 4.1 and then relate that to further potential on page 22, as highlighted in FPT committee. It didn't come forward to FPT committee and saying the social work will be in an overspend situation. So it was just highlighted, and it was run for another period where we are in a crisis, and the report should highlight that it is a crisis, and it doesn't. The severity of just where we're at in terms of, as George says, that £1 million that has been put in as a contingency that you're going to use and still be in an overspend? Or could be, and maybe that's my question, will we be in an overspend even with that £1 million of contingency being brought back into budget for social work, and then looking at, you know, the whole budget process for next year, because it is a crisis. And the other one was in terms of what Stephen said in his remarks in terms of kinship, and I would totally support that. You know, and we've gone a long way from when I was campaigning for kinship to be recognised to the extent it is now. But then there's residential care, and we've recently closed and sold a building that was used for residential care in Dumfries and Galloway. So how do we square that in terms of what we need as a social work committee when we've already sold within the last year or so buildings that were used for residential care? So it's how much will it be, even if that £1 million was brought in as contingency into the budget, will we still be in an overspend, which is a crisis?
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. Stephen, would you like to come in?
Yeah. Councillor Scobie, again, thanks for the question. And in relation to the reporting of the social work budget over many years now, we've been in similar positions where we have projected similar levels of overspend, and at the end of the year, it's been managed, and for Councillor Jameson's point, it's been managed corporately in terms of underspends elsewhere. What we're trying to do now is actually show the extent of the pressure on the budget and what we actually spend as a service. So within this, of the 1 million or 1.1 million of agency placements, we're reporting the whole of the overspend to this committee. However, 40% of that will, in future, within year, be reported through education, because that's their contribution. So that'll impact on around about £500,000, which technically would take the 1.25 million down to 750k, which means if we use our contingency fund, we would break even. Well, you know, we wouldn't technically be breaking even, but, you know, we're using the money that we need to. So this shows us that within the overall entirety of the funding available to us across the corporate piece and what we currently have as a contingency fund, that we will be okay. However, it doesn't truly reflect what we spend as a service on a day-to-day basis, and that's what we're putting into the budget panel to say this is what we need on an ongoing basis. It has to be part of our budget, not sitting as a side as a contingency. So that's the conversations that we're having, and I think that's been reflected not just today but in previous meetings, but with much more debate today than we've had over recent months, which is very welcome. So you asked about will we be overspent. I've just given you a response that says hopefully not, is what I would say. In relation to the residential establishment that was closed, that happened during the pandemic, and that happened for a number of different reasons. Predominantly we were seeing a reduction in the need for placements because early intervention was working pre-pandemic, and probably exaggerated to a point during the pandemic because in many respects the world stopped doing several things. Also, the building itself wasn't suitable for residential childcare. It wouldn't be registered today by the Care Commission, the Care Inspectorate as they're now called. The location wasn't necessarily suitable because most of the children were from other parts of Dumfries. Now, I know there's an irony in terms of we're setting them up with the region, but at that point, you know, a decision was made, and that was my decision. But that doesn't mean it's a decision that's set in stone around are the current levels of provision that we have appropriate. They're clearly not at this moment in time, and that's why we've got some plans for the short, medium and longer term. Thank you.
Would you like to come back in?
Just to the last point, I've listened to what Stephen is saying in terms of the budget and how we will end up at the end of the year. It still, you know, highlights that we're in a crisis. I think that's where the language, and that's not a criticism, rather than maybe should change to will, so that we can reflect that. But to the suitability of the care line, and it's water under the bridge now, it's gone, but all what you said at the end there was arguments that were put forward when we were moving from Milton House to Cairnryan, to suitability, location and everything else. And it obviously wasn't listened to, and that's just a comment in terms of where we are now to where we were when we had Milton House.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. Councillor Ferguson?
Thanks very much for letting me in. I was going to make a comment about how long people with their hands up online were having to wait here, because I'd had my hand up when Councillor Durward was talking. So can we keep an eye on it so that we get a fair reflection on, rather than just in the room?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Councillor Ferguson, but everybody's hand went up at the same time through in the chambers.
Well, it would appear that there's something wrong with that, because that happened the other day as well. It was flagged up. So it's not your fault, Chrissy. I appreciate it, how difficult it is sitting there. Just a couple of things. Stephen, if I picked you up correctly, a lot of the increase is as a result of things that came to light during COVID. Yeah. So I think the question really is when you're talking to the budget and when you're talking to corporate services in terms of finance and everyone else, and for the finance officer, have we accessed any of the COVID money that's still there for social work? And the question really for me, the $64,000 question is, should we as social work go there cap in hand and ask for crumbs off the table, or should the table be handing out the slices of bread back to social work and saying, we see you're overspent, you're not willingly overspent, it's necessity, and you should be resourced accordingly? Because I don't say, my view is you're not overspent, Stephen. Right? You're under-resourced for the crisis you've got. And it's the problem we've got with the whole budget set, the way the budgets are managed and looked after and everything else. So I think I would like to get away from being overspent to under-resourced, or an extra resource is required, or whatever. It might sound a bit twee, but that for me actually reflects better the situation. George mentioned something early on about changing recommendation 2.3. I'd be willing to second him if that's a motion to add that, because we as a committee should be saying to the budget panel, we are unhappy with the way the budgets are put together just now, and we as a committee are seeking that the department is properly resourced to do the job that it's charged with doing. And I don't think anybody would ever think for a minute that we waste money in social work. We actually don't have any customers, for lack of better words, who come to us willingly. They come to us because either they need help or they've been referred for help. So I think we just need a massive change in the way we actually address the budget setting for social work. It's especially the time now, Chrissy, as Vice Chair, that when we're moving towards a potential new structure within the council where social work has been elevated to where I think it should always have been, almost like an equal partner along the senior management team. So I'm happy to support George. I'm happy to second, because I think George did say he was moving it, that we, as a committee, we want this referred to the budget panel as a sense of urgency to actually get something done about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I'll just bring Claire in on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Advice was already given to the committee that the matter is being considered by the budget panel at the January meeting, so clearly it's within the committee's gift to add the recommendation to further note that is being taken forward.
Thank you, Claire. Stephen, would you like to come in with any comments?
The only comment, Councillor Ferguson, was in relation to COVID funds and the short-term monies. I can confirm that the service has been given considerable short-term funding throughout the COVID pandemic and subsequently for some short-term posts. And we will be considering the posts that we've employed as part of the review, and we'll be making recommendations as to what we would like to see happen as part of the budget setting process as we move forward. Thank you.
Is that okay? Councillor Ferguson, would you like to come back in?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, and the deference to what the governance officer was saying, we need to add our weight behind this, not just the. I fully appreciate that Stephen and the rest of his team have been taking this forward through the proper channels, but we as a committee need to endorse that and support that and say we need something in place now before we have. The word crisis has been used a lot here, right? There's a number of different definitions of the word crisis, as everyone's aware, but the crisis we don't want here is for our service to not be able to meet its statutory obligations. That's the big crisis, over and above the individual crises for the people who access the services from social work. So we have got a very, very clear responsibility in law, right, to meet certain needs, and that needs to be reflected back so that it's really viewed very, very clearly by the budget panel to come forward that there needs to be, rather than just shift the old saying, the deck chairs in the Titanic, let's make a real structural change in the way that we fund social work.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I've got Councillor Wilson wanting to come in on this point.
It's just to highlight that, like George, I sit in the budget panel as well. Now, it's not a decision-making forum, but it is good to bring these things to the budget panel, but that's for all groups to consider in their budget, like when we're doing the budget setting. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. We'll go to Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a very interesting discussion. The point I was wondering, following on from Linda's excellent contribution, was if we are spending almost £200,000 per individual providing care out with our region, do we as Dumfries and Galloway Council receive any income from any other authority to look after their personnel? The other thing is, and I hope you don't mind me saying so, I've been a councillor here for something like 7-8 years, and we've been in this situation time and time again, and we seem to be going about patching and trying to make good with the funds available. Is it not time we sort of had a look at an alternative way of providing care and support for individuals? I know there's a consultation on autism on at the moment, but have we ever tried perhaps working with the universities or further education establishments we have in the region to, I don't know, provide a purpose-built building? And what comes to my mind, sadly, is the bridge sitting idle virtually all the time. Could we not look at a different solution rather than purchase care from external providers at a cost of £1 million per year? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I'll bring Stephen Morgan in there.
Thank you, Councillor Young. In relation to alternatives, we continuously look at what is best. And your final point in relation to autism is a question that's been asked many times locally. And in a previous iteration of the Children's Services Plan, we did look at and agree that a specialist provision would be built locally. But that was then taken off the table. And this is before my time, so I'm only speaking from history. But we do look at all of the different things that can and can't happen. And I think, the debate that's in education at the moment about how do we meet the needs of children in schools, in classrooms, etc., is best. And if we can keep children in with their peers, that's fantastic. And looking at solutions there as early downstream as possible. We will always have circumstances whereby either our own provision's full or needs are so specialist that a single local authority area might not be able to manage those, and that's why we have organisations such as Autism Scotland who specialise in those highly specialised provisions. So it is a challenge, and you're right that we have been going round this table many times before, and I'm hopeful that the conversation today and taking this into the budget panel and looking at how the service and the department as it will become is resourced is a positive step in the right direction, because I too want to get to the point whereby we can go into a new financial year fairly confident that the resource we have at the start matches our current day-to-day spend. But people being people, and the conditions that we find ourselves in across the whole of the piece at the moment means, complexities will happen, needs will increase across the piece, and we're seeing that happening time and time again. And that's why we're trying to bring in some earlier interventions and some crisis support teams into the future to try and combat some of that as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Do you want to come back in?
Yes, please. Appreciate that, Chair. No, my first query was this region spending £200,000 per year on having our needy residents looked after out with the region, and I was wondering if we as a region receive any funding from other authorities to look after their needy residents. Thank you.
Stephen, come back in.
Apologies, Councillor Young, I missed that question. The short answer is no. So when other local authorities from other parts of Scotland or the UK place children in Dumfries and Galloway, it is with the independent sector, which are predominantly private companies, so they get the income. What our colleagues in education can do, though, and do, is if there's an education need that's required, then they can actually negotiate with the placing authority around having some of those costs or all of those costs recovered. But what that in turn does is it creates additional demand on our already stretched resources for education. So the short answer is no, but with a slight caveat that we can get some income or cost recovery rather for some of the education elements of that.
Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for letting me back in. The first one's just a yes or no question. Is this pressure being felt across Scotland? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. 2 committees ago, when there was an overspend launched, addressed in that paper, I had mentioned that we need to be looking at this as a council, but I also mentioned about how we really actually need to be taking this to the Scottish Government, because this is happening everywhere. It's not just us, it's not just a problem with this council, and it's okay to sit here and say let's move the beans around, but they are beans. There is nothing else left. And the £1 million overspend, if we do then put it into the budget, has to come from another overstretched service. Now, we're already worried about the funding that we're going to get from the Scottish Government. So the short-term funding that we had for COVID, we are well aware, and many services on this council should actually have been a long-term funding, because this problem is not just going to go away in the next year or two. I think this will be a long-term problem that we've had that's been left over since COVID. I think that maybe full council needs to think about writing a letter to the Scottish Government to say that what we're getting is absolutely unacceptable, because we now can't, or we are now looking at very overstretched services that potentially needs more funding than we can actually provide for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Sorry. Councillor David Slater.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, you said earlier that 6 carers were now leaving, and obviously I assume that they'll be being replaced. How difficult is it to do that? Is it because of funding levels or monies they receive for helping caring kids and that? Is that one of the reasons why it may be more difficult to get more people into this system? Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to come in?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's one we continually ask ourselves. And a couple of years ago, when foster carers were leaving, and some of the foster carers who were, at the beginning or the middle of their caring career, were telling us it was because of financial reasons. Our allowances were quite low. We didn't pay fees, but this committee and the council backed us on introducing a fee. And I think what the fee's done is it's stopped the acceleration of losing more carers. We've seen new carers come into play. It's also an extremely difficult thing to do, as well as an extremely rewarding thing. And the assessment process is one of the most intensive assessments that social work, undertake, and it takes a minimum of 3 months for a reason. But therein lies part of the problem. When somebody leaves, it takes time to replace them, and it's not a question of 1 in, 1 out, or 6 in, 6 out. We're continuously trying to recruit foster carers, and we will continue to do so. As you're aware, there's now a national minimum fostering allowance, which means, we're on parity with the rest of Scotland around that the allowances. We pay the fee, so hopefully, where we were competing with neighbouring authorities, we're on more of an equal footing now, and I'm hopeful that we'll see an improvement moving forward. The other thing as well, though, is if people can get employment that pays more than what a fostering allowance and fee would be, given the cost of living crisis, they're more likely to do that. But that's the same with all types of employment at this moment in time. So it's various factors, and we continually review them. We, as Councillor Stevenson requested earlier, we do ask carers why they're leaving if we don't know the reason already, and we feed that into our intelligence as we move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jameson?
Yes, just go back to the recommendations. I agree with everything that folk are saying. I would like to see in that 2.3 that the committee backs the efforts of the officials in promoting the needs for a much more intensive look at social works funding for the longer term as well as the short term. Carolyn Wilson is absolutely correct. The budget panel is not a decision making. That actually adds ironically, that adds power, because all parties are discussing the material rather than anything political. So I think the budget panel is a good place to forward the needs of the Social Works Committee, and it also empowers Stephen to get to present the facts and figures and their opinions. So I think it's really important that this committee backs what Stephen has already been doing in terms of promoting the needs of social service funding to the budget panel. And then it comes back to the committee after that. So it's always a committee decision at the end of step 2. So I don't see any negatives in this, and it's not point scoring politically. It's about raising the issues of social services needs. So I would put forward a motion that we just add that the council adds support to the social works efforts to highlight their you can word it better than I would ask for support, and I know that Councillor Ferguson's seconded that. So I would like to think there's no argument in that. It's not a political, it's a needs-based motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. I think we're all on the same page then. We're all seeing the same issues, and we're all more than happy from the agreement in the room. So I don't think it needs to be a motion. I think it can be added to the recommendations. Claire, thank you. And then last speaker again, Councillor Darwood, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. All I was going to do was add on to what Councillor Jameson's already done, so I'll withdraw my question or comment. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Darwood. We have Councillor Mail wanting to come in.
Yeah, Chair, and it is about the finance. I mean, it was mentioned about the extra COVID money and that some of that had been used. So are what we're seeing in the papers exactly what is going to be the cost going forward? Because if we've been helped from Peter and a little bit from Paul to pay things, how is that going to disappear because it was short term, or is that going to stay within the need for a budget? And have we got a real figure here for what might happen? Because I think at this budget panel at the end of the financial year, what we really need is absolutely the damage it's going to be to social work. Because the other one I wonder about is, while we've seen from COVID the placements going up, are we at a period where they're starting to level out, or is this something that's going to continue year on year? Because I mean, the people in there are going to stay there for years, but is it going to increase again and increase again? Because I think that's something we need to try and bottom out.
Thank you for that. Stephen, would you like to come in?
Thanks for the questions. In relation to the first one, the figures in the paper represent this year's position, but moving forward, the figures in relation to what the department will be asking for will look different to this, and that will be based on the work that Alison and the team are doing in relation to crisis intervention, early intervention, kinship support, etc., and the potential need in the future for capital investment for residential units if that's the way we go. So I wouldn't want to guess a figure right now, and I wouldn't even want to give you the estimated figure right now because it will change as the work develops. So the ask will be different, is what I would say. And clearly, This gives us the costs of the current care that we're providing. It doesn't give us the costs of the additional resource that we would be asking for as part of that process. And the second question around, are we seeing things level off? The detailed analysis that Alison and her team have done around families who are currently in system and approaching, I'll use that word again today because it's absolutely appropriate here, crisis, indicates to us that we've currently got 20 plus families who are being worked with in an intensive manner whereby there may be a risk to family breakdown and the requirements for more placements. So that's why it's critical we can get those community supports through the department in place to keep those children in their own homes so they don't require. So we're anticipating this pressure being around for a number of years and potentially with increases, and certainly with increases if we don't do anything differently in the following year.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Mill? Thank you. So if all members are happy, we can now go to the recommendations.
I've got my hand up, Chrissy.
Oh, sorry, I apologise. If you'd like to...
No, it's okay. It's okay. I think there's something wrong with the system there, Chrissy. There was just one last question. I'm pleased that you've added that to the recommendations without going to any need for moving it. So that's good news. It's a different question for Stephen though. 4.5, they're talking about continuing care. Are we seeing an increase of people? More people come on. If I can link continuing care to like the supermarket belt, normally you would get people who come on and then they'd get to the checkout and then they would be over a certain age or 25, 26, whatever it is, and then they would move off the system. So are we seeing more people being stuck in the system or being involved in the system? Sorry, the first question is, initially, are there more people coming onto the system than going off? And then the ones who are coming off, how many of them are then into adult care out with the continuing care regime, which is slightly different? I'm just wondering if Stephen could give some idea on that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Ferguson. Bring Stephen in.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. At this moment in time, more people are coming into the childcare system than are leaving. That's why we're seeing the increase in placement demand. In relation to those who choose to remain in current placements, we are seeing an increase in young people who want to remain in placements, and that's a really positive thing. It means they're going to have, better support in some of the most complex times of their life in terms of early adulthood, and we can potentially have more impact on the longer term outcomes as well. So although it's a challenge from a financial perspective, from a human perspective, it's absolutely the right thing to do, in my opinion. In relation to adult care, it really does depend on individual need, Councillor Ferguson. So children and young people with complex needs, disabilities, medical conditions, etc., then many of them will go into adult care. But the vast majority of the children and young people we work with who have had traumatic lifestyles and experiences and they don't have those additional medical or complex needs from a disability perspective, medical perspective, and they tend not to enter the adult system unless it's the adult criminal justice system, which can happen. So hopefully that answers the question.
You happy with that?
Thanks, Chrissy. That's great. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if everybody's happy, no more hands up, no more questions? Okay, thank you. We'll go to the recommendations. So 2.1, we're asked to note the allocation of the budget pressures funding of 197k to support the implementation of the Scottish recommended allowance for foster carer and kinship carers as agreed by Finance, Procurement and Transformation Committee on the 14th of November 2023 and detailed in Appendix 2. Happy to note. 2.2, note the extent of further budgetary pressures and increasing demands currently impacting social work services and the approach to address these as set out in paragraphs 4.3 to 4.7 and Appendix 2. And 2.3, note that the current forecasts that social work services may return an overspend of 1.250 million as a result of the pressures identified above as highlighted in Appendix 1 and the opportunities to contain these pressures through the identification of cost reductions, mitigation measures is currently being processed. And we're going to add in there, if I Pass you over to Claire.
Okay, thank you. We suggest a further 2.4 to further note that this matter is being considered at the budget panel in January 2024, and that these efforts to look at the funding options are supported by the committee as a matter of importance. I might want to put an urgency there as well. Okay.
Are we happy with that, members? Yep, thank you very much. We'll move to item 5, Head of Service 6-month assessment and social work service plan. I will note on the report at 2.1 there was a slight error in the dates. It should read April 2023 to September 2023, not 22. So this report from the Interim Chief Social Work Officer for the service plan performance covers the period of April 2023 to September 2023. This report on performance includes council plan delivery, service plan delivery, change and improvement activities, success measures, and the management of the risks within the service risks register. I welcome the key achievements detailed in section 4.41 of the report regarding the workforce and career pathway development. I also note the significant progress and projects in Appendix 1 highlighting the service's dedication to the delivery of the council plan outcomes. Do we have any questions? Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. On page 34, the development of corporate parents and responsibilities, that's at 60%. I was just wondering if that would be completed by its due date on the 31st. And again, the same question, but on page 39, develop indicative maximum caseload management practices to support social work leaders. It's only at 33%. Will it be achieved by the due date on the 31st of March? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Alison, would you like to come in on that one?
Apologies. In relation to the corporate parenting question, yes, we're on target for that. There's a lot of work being undertaken. It relates directly to Councillor Dorwood's questions earlier in relation to residential provision, where that will be our biggest priority in terms of reviewing, scoping and developing residential provision based on what is needed locally. We are undertaking significant pieces of work both within the council management team but across the partnership in relation to corporate parenting and corporate parenting responsibilities. That will include further development of information leaflets for parents, families, children, young people, as well as for professionals and partners.
Yeah, happy with that, Councillor Stevenson. Thank you. Councillor Jameson?
Second point.
Sorry, can I just bring Stephen in on your second point? Apologies, Councillor Jameson.
Thank you. I'd like to highlight that for the indicative caseload, we did bring some information back to the previous committee, but there's a lot of work going on, and Alison and Rebecca are leading around social work governance. And Rebecca or Avra, I don't know if you want to come in relation to where we are with that piece of work at the moment.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I can update members that we are on track with that piece of work. We're collectively coming together to analyse current data that we have to ensure that the data that's not missing but fragmented is brought into the forum so that we can address any areas. And as I say, we are on track with it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Jameson.
Thank you. I've got a couple of scrutiny questions, if I can indulge you. The first one is reference to page 33-34, SO13SW. It's like a COVID inquiry. What I'm looking at is delivering the model of education that meets the needs of the most vulnerable, particularly around care experienced children and young people, including alternative curriculum requirements. The Education Act 2004, which I was really impressed that Stephen could almost recite verbatim. It does identify key requirements. That Act has been updated several times, and it does identify risk that we have to accept that these are acts, that they're not if or why or when we have to do it. So I'll use one specific example, which is, this is the bit that I was really impressed in. I'll give Stephen a heads up. At least 12 months prior to the expected school leaving date, request and take account of information and advice from appropriate sectors about the provision of their child and young person when he leaves school. That's just one of many recommendations in that they're all high risk of us not achieving. I'm not saying we're not achieving them, but a lot of them we're in a risky position. So I just identified that one, Stephen, and clearly you were aware of that because I spoke to you this morning, but it's under Education Act, but clearly there's an inference in yourself as well. So how closely do you work with education and with ENR, for example, because these children will be leaving school and hopefully we can get a positive destination from this. So how does that work in practice and how comfortable you are that it is working?
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. I'll bring Stephen in.
Thanks, Councillor Jameson. And I'll pick up your point around the specific in the plan initially. And the wording of that, we're not actually comfortable with, but that was our fault for not picking it up sooner. And it's how we assist colleagues in education to have a better model for some children. And that's around a specific project that we're working with our Children's Services Planning Group. I'm expecting an update on that next week. But in relation to the Additional Support for Learning Act, you're absolutely correct in relation to those children and young people who have got identified needs and the requirement that a minimum of 12 months prior to them leaving school, we should bring in other partners. Again, Alison's leading on from a social work perspective with colleagues from health and education, work around transitions and what that looks like. And one of the big issues for us here, it's about the children that social work don't know who are in the education system because we don't need to know. But when they move into adulthood, they will need some level of support through health and social care and how we can get those transitions right. So there is an awful lot of work going on to try and make those processes as clear as possible. But I think it'd be fair to say, Alison, that there's still some work to be done. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I mean, it's ongoing work, and those transition points and that future planning features not just within our children with disability and transitions, but within our GIRFIC plan, our corporate parenting plan, also because we need to look at some of the barriers that are in the way for some children more than others. We do work very closely with education colleagues in this. And in relation to some of the barriers that prevent children maybe attending school, we recognise that as a pressure across services at the moment, but we don't see that as a responsibility that just sits with education. So again, in relation to Councillor Dorwood's questions earlier, what are we doing in relation to the crisis that is reaching all of these children? Because education can provide the supports if we can get children into school. It's getting children into school at the moment that's the problem, and that's why that's a corporate parenting responsibility as well as a shared responsibility across the partnership. So there is a recognition that what we've been doing before isn't working at the moment. We need to think differently, we need to do differently. And through the GIRFIC leadership, we are looking at some specific circumstances that have been raised by elected members to almost say, well, we can't pretend that we can do everything that we used to, so what can we do differently? How can we combine our services so that together we're stronger, that we can deliver the best services that we can to children in their own communities? So these are challenging conversations, but they need to be challenging and they need to be different to the conversations that have taken place before. So that is very much taking place within our corporate parenting arena as well as our GIRFIC arena at the moment.
Would you like to come back in, Councillor Jameson?
That's really excellent and really encouraging, and I know that I've banged on about this to Stephen privately and publicly for a long time, but things are moving. I would also add, and I know you meant this, but it's really important not just to get children into school, but once they're in school, the anxiety levels are managed, and there's a really important place for assisted support needs in school, because these children come into school. It's difficult even to get over the door, and once they're over the door, there's a need for that connectivity, so that the teachers and the social workers know what does this child need to actually benefit. The other question, just quickly, page 47, and it's kind of related as well, but it's in the risk register, and it's a very high risk. And it regards the risk is a shortfall of skilled social work services. The risk factor is inability to deliver statutory duties. One of the mitigations is council commitment to organisational development. And again, I've spoken about this quite often, but because folk are busy, they tend to work in their own silos, and Alison has indicated that that's changing. But the reorganisation that we're looking at should really bolster not just the notion, but the real need for everybody to work together. And our experience in previous work groups where all the silos tick their own boxes, but we need to tick everybody's boxes. So what do you see the benefits of that council commitment to organisational development? It's a lot of fancy words, but what's it got to mean to the folk on the ground and the children and their families?
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. I will just say on the back of Alison saying there, social work have been working very hard to work collaboratively across with education and with youth work facilities and health to get the work more streamlined for children, to support them within the education system and also within the home system. But for your second question, I'll pass you on to Stephen. Thanks.
With your permission, Councillor Jameson, we've got an update on the workforce development plan, and I think the question you're asking there fits really quite neatly in there in terms of input from Jamie and colleagues later in the meeting, if that's okay.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Yeah, that's in item 9. It fits in with the workforce plan. So thank you. Now move to Councillor Dawood. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jameson just asked one of the questions. I think he's got a channel into my head this morning, which is quite scary, actually, but very scary, actually. I was going to ask a question on SWS 0.2, but I take it that will be covered in additional paper, so I might come back on that one. But just I suppose one of the additional things is, what are the blockers? Because despite the best efforts of the team and the hardest working and the mitigations that are put in, there are obviously blockers and challenges, but that might be addressed in the paper going forward, so I'll leave that hanging. So obviously, well, not obviously, the next risk I want to look at is SWS 03, failure to adapt practices in response to decreasing finances within a given timescale. And the mitigation is social work change programme, which is great, but again, what are the blockers and the challenges there? It says decreasing finances, obviously that's one of the blockers, but is there anything, that's a pretty obvious one. And again, that risk isn't, in terms of the current risk, isn't too bad if you compare them to other risks, but it's bad enough because it's in the red quartile and you want to get that down. So, blockers and challenges as well as financial issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawood. I'll pass you over to Stephen. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Dawood, the many subject matters we touched on in the finance paper highlights some of the issues here. And in terms of how we adapt and respond, decreasing finances, resource across the piece, that's a clear risk. And I think what we've already highlighted today shows that we are looking in service around trying to, well, not all of it, but we looked at the reasons for children coming into care, the type of support they might need. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do. When we're looking at workforce, we've also analysed the fact that, I've highlighted in my Setting the Bar report that we don't have enough social workers locally, but that's a national issue and there are not enough social workers nationally. So what is it we can do in the workforce that brings more people in different levels? So those questions can be answered later, I suspect. And I really don't want to rehearse what we've already discussed. So I think most of those blockers have been well aired today, if you would agree.
You happy with that, Councillor Dawood?
Yeah, I appreciate that. We have had an extensive debate about the pressure of market forces, which I've said again, and I've said I wouldn't, but I've said it again, in terms of that's an impossible one for any local authority to deal with because it's totally out with our control. And I would appreciate at some point going forward perhaps a further debate on that, but that might come in the options paper that you're producing in terms of reviews. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I actually, a lot was covered by what your answer to a previous question, Chair. Quite interesting. And I'm not going to comment on the number of things that are at 30%, given that they were only allocated in October, right? So it's understandable that they're at very early stages, and I'm comforted by the acknowledgement from the staff, the senior staff there, that these things they should be on target. The one thing I would add is that on page 40 there's a bit about 10,000 voices, and I'm just looking for an assurance that the issues in 10,000 voices that aren't currently being covered with a new joint working between the NHS, educational psychology, social work, youth work, will get the same emphasis, is maybe a better way of putting it, than the mental health issues that are currently being looked at very intensively by all these different services. And that's brilliant to see, because that's really exactly what should be happening. So I suppose it's just the other things that are in 10,000 voices. Can we get some sort of assurance that they're working again with youth work and other teams to make sure that we're dealing with all the issues in 10,000 voices, not just some? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I'll pass you over to Alison.
Sorry, again, I can provide that reassurance in relation to that response. I spoke, I think, 2 committees ago about a revised children's services planning structure that has recently been agreed through the Children's Strategic Planning Partnership. And within that, we will be developing a quality assurance framework that will be based on the promised performance indicators. And that will cover everything that you would want to know in relation to the 10,000 voices, but as well as to the responses we had through our own Bright Spots initiatives. We have taken the findings from the 10,000 voices and Bright Spots, and we've incorporated them into our workshop planning as we revise and refresh our corporate parenting plan, because what we really want to know is, well, what is going to make a difference to our children in Dumfries and Galloway? We already have significant information from the Independent Care Review about the experiences of children who are care experienced. But what 10,000 Voices and what Bright Spots gives us is the experience, the views, the wishes and the needs of children in Dumfries and Galloway. So we are all over that, Councillor Ferguson, and we have ensured that we have incorporated that into our planning, not just on a social work service basis, but in the partnership planning that we are leading on currently.
Thank you for that, Alison. Councillor Ferguson, would you like to come back in? Are you happy with that?
Absolutely delighted. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you. If we could go to Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, Chair, I'm looking at page 30, item 5. Council's plan, outcomes and principles, and how the proposals contribute to the delivery of the Council's strategic outcomes and indeed the impact and principles. And I'm looking under the health and well-being, in one of the bullet points there, access to personal support and care helps keep people safe. And I look again at our plan from on pages 44 and 45 from the older persons over 65 home care costs from 1 right through to 8. And really these are not measured for half years and not measured for half years. I'm really just given prior notice here that the Democratic Alliance group is going to come forward requesting a report, and I see Vlad has joined us, requesting a report on the care home sector, and there's been reference made to it earlier in terms of just how much of a crisis care homes are under, and indeed we have seen 2 closed in Dumfries and Galloway. And it's really around the right care, right place consultation strategy that's ongoing just now, and whether indeed that's, what risk and how culpable the council is in terms of delivering alongside the Health and Social Care Partnership those places that would be required under that consultation and strategy that's being worked on just now. So it's the risk and culpability that the council is under, and indeed what contingencies we as a council may require should any other homes close as a result of finances or indeed the Care Inspectorate finding that the standards are as required. So we will be coming forward with seeking a report. So I'm not looking for answers today in terms of adult services, but we will be coming forward looking for that report so that we can look at the risk, the culpability, under right care, right place. And it's no matter of just trying to purchase 80 beds when indeed the care homes can already provide the staff on the number of beds that are actually vacant in care homes just now. So we will be coming forward with that report to governance so that we get an opportunity to discuss that.
Thank you for your comments, and that's noted. Thank you, Councillor Scobie. If I could bring Councillor Young in.
Thank you, Chair. Always an honour to follow on with Councillor Scobie. Just a couple of thoughts, and perhaps they're totally out of order. First of all, Councillor Ferguson is very proud of the Grow Your Own scheme, which ran for several years to successfully engage some other aspects of the council to train as social workers. I'm just wondering if it's time for that to be relaunched, because one of the things the council misses out on is carers who work for the Integrated Joint Board, and perhaps insight into pay slips. Mind you, do you have pay slips nowadays? I don't know. Anyway, perhaps make people aware that the council's relaunching this excellent scheme. The other thing is, just by the by, really, when I moved down to Dumfries and Galloway, probably about 40, 50 years ago, one of the clinchers for me as a young teacher was the provision of a house. Now, we're fortunate in the Stewardship getting about 80 houses being completed in the next 6 months. Is it possible for the council to ask one of our provider landlords if they could set aside 2 or 3 houses for the first 6 months of a new recruit into social work in Dumfries and Galloway? Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Councillor Young, there for your questions. I'll pass you on to Stephen. Thanks.
Councillor Young, again, with your permission, the first point around Grow Your Own, if we could pick that up in the workforce paper, because I believe the Chair wants to bring a specific mention to what we're doing around that herself, and it best fits with that paper, and Jamie and Avril can speak more to that. In relation to our colleagues, in terms of registered social landlords and looking at how we can keep properties available for incoming staff, that's something that historically has been done in the past, normally when councils own their own properties and they've got more leeway with that. But as we're all aware, we don't own any of our own properties, and if we were to do that, the council would have to pay full rental cost recovery. Otherwise, that would be passed across all tenants, which wouldn't be at all acceptable. So I think we can certainly look at different options in different ways, but we would need to be really careful about what some of the impacts might be on the general public who are tenants in those households.
Would you like to come back in?
No, Stephen's answered the question fully. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Young. So if there's no more questions, we can go to the recommendations. So 2.1, we have reviewed the summary of performance for the social work service plan for the period of the 1st of April 2023 to 30th of September 2023, which includes council plan delivery, service plan delivery, change and improvement activities, success measures, specific service, council-wide, including health and safety and local government benchmarking framework, and the management of the risks within the service risk register at Appendix 1. 2.2, scrutinise the exemption report and considered whether the actions proposed are adequate to improve performance and future monitoring of areas which have not met the target in Appendix 2. And 2.3, agree the proposed amendments to current social work service plan measures, Appendix 3. Are we happy with those, members? Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, Curator de Litem. The report relates to the introduction of the new scheme to maintain a panel of curators. Members are being asked to adapt the scheme as detailed in the report. The report details a new reporting officers scheme for safeguarding children during the legal proceedings. The scheme is also a fixed fee scheme with fees in line with other local authority schemes across the Sheridan. Lucy Irons-Young and Alison Penman are available to answer any questions. I'll open the floor to members. Councillor Darwood, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No issues with the proposal to standardise the scheme because the Sheriff of South Strathclyde and Dumfries and Galloway. It's a question. Additional finance into something doesn't always improve the quality, but will a standardisation of the scheme reduce the quality of the panel? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. If I pass you over to Vlad Valentini, thanks.
Good morning, members. I think it's a really valid question. I think the most important thing within the scheme is to standardise the quality. And that's what the scheme's there for. It's in essence been adopted more or less nationally, and we've seen that across a few of the sheriffdoms, and it's been successfully applied in terms of the particular rates that you're referring to there. And in essence, the feedback we've had elsewhere where it's been applied is that it has improved that quality element of it. It's really important that we tighten up on this. These are regs that are there for us to set up this panel, and what you've got in front of you, members, is us tightening up on that process in line with the overall sheriffdom schemes that are there. As you'll see within 2.3, there might be amendments that we might need to make through the Sheriff Principal's comments, but in essence, the answer I would give to that quality element of it is that's exactly what we're trying to do, and we're going to have the net as wide as we can in terms of capturing as many curator ad litems as we can across the area.
Thank you, Vlad. Councillor Dow, are you happy with that? Yeah. We'll move to Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Vlad, for that. And trying to make the paper easy to read for lay people. I was just going to ask very quickly, were any of the local officers involved in the writing of this, or has this been a combined effort amongst the sheriffdom local authorities? And just for clarification as well, at 2.3, when we send this to the sheriff, if the sheriff amends it, we can't do any. That person has got the ultimate responsibility in the end for the signing this off. Is that correct?
Thank you for your questions there. I'll bring Vlad in for the second question.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Very valid questions, and important that these are discussed today. So the first point is this is our scheme. Under our regulations that are the responsibility of the council, and therefore we set that up through that regulatory process. However, as we know, we have to work within. We have to work with the courts. We have to work with the sheriffs, and in particular Sheriff Principal in regards to getting their buy-in in terms of that scheme. So yes, it's our scheme. We appoint to that panel. But we take fully on board all suggestions and consultation within that with the sheriffs and Sheriff Principal in particular. So yes, the answer is it's for the council to kind of determine what the panel should be and put that forward, but really we do that in tandem with the court, and that's the best way, because ultimately the way it works is a bit of a strange beast, and you're right in terms of this has not been easy for officers, and Lucy in particular, trying to put this forward to members, because it's a complicated landscape in terms of the regulatory function as well as the appointment. On a case-by-case basis, the sheriff will appoint from that panel if they're happy to appoint from the panel, and that's why we need their buy-in. So they could also go out with the panel if they wish, but the purpose of this is to get buy-in from all concerned through the sheriff principle, and therefore the sheriffs will draw from that panel and that panel alone. So hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Vlad. Are you happy with that, Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, thanks, and pass on thanks to Lucy for the work there, because she has made something that's really quite very, very complicated easy to read. So thank you.
Thank you for that as well, and thank you, Lucy. Do any of the members have any questions? No? Okay, thank you. We'll move to the recommendations then. 2.1, consider and adopt the curator Adlament scheme as outlined in Appendix to enable the Council to maintain a panel of curators in accordance with the Council's obligations under the Curator and Reporting Officers Panel Scotland Regulations 2001 and the Panel of Persons to Safeguard the Interests of Children Scotland Amendment Regulations 2011, the regulations. 2.2, note that the adoption of the proposed Creator Adlament scheme shall be substantially in the same terms of the consistent with the Creator Adlament schemes adopted by other local authorities within the Sheriffdom of South Strathclyde, Dumfries and Galloway, and 2.3 authorise council officers to make such amendments to the Creator Adlament scheme as is necessary to, and may be recommended by the Sheriff Principal following consultation with the same. Thank you. Item 7, the Social Work Services Annual Review of Outside Bodies. This report provides members with the first annual review as agreed through full council and review of standing orders subcommittee, providing the opportunity to review each outside body where we have current appointments, and also provides the opportunity to remove or add to outside bodies to the scheme. Tracy Soncourt is available online to answer any questions. Do we have any questions, members? Thank you, Councillor Stevenson.
It's not so much a question, it's more just a comment for the committee. The IGB representation is 3 years for each councillor. One, it always concerns me the amount of jumping on and off that committee if we've actually got any councillors that haven't been on it before. But can we then, if you're on it for 3 years, could you then take a break for a year and then be on it for another 3 years, or is your 3 years done? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. We'll pass you over to Tracy.
Thanks, members. Good morning. Yes, I don't believe there's a time restriction on that, Councillor Stevenson. I will double check the scheme for that one, but I think yes, I don't think there's a time limit on how many years you have to be off of the IGB before you can sit back on it again.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Stevenson?
Yeah, just it says, and I know from being on the IGB that it's not to exceed 3 years, so I don't know what that means. Is that like per term? Is that, do you know, I think maybe we could do with a wee bit more information from that at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Stevenson. I'll let Claire come in.
Thank you. Certainly, when passed before appointments to the IGB, we've taken the approach that we've ensured that those appointments have been reviewed within those 3 years, and in some cases reappointed. It's just making sure that the appointments are looked at within those timescales.
Thank you for that, Claire. Do any other members have any questions? No, thank you. So we'll move to the
Chair, I'm in the chat for speaking, please. It's Councillor Little.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Little. Apologies for that.
No worries. It was just, did we ever find out the situation with Blindcraft Trust? I'm sure that was through social work. I was on that, and then it's never been mentioned again in the lists, but I still was getting invites, even though I informed the organisation I was no longer on it. But it just seems to be a bit muddy on, it's not very clear whether they're still on our list of outside bodies.
Thanks for that. Tracy, can you help Councillor Little with that one, please?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Little. Yeah, it's not currently on our scheme as it stands. I believe they no longer wanted member representation, but I'll check back and I'll come back to you on that one, Councillor Little. But it's currently not on our scheme as adopted by full council.
Thank you for that. Are you happy with that, Councillor Little?
No, that's great, Chair. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you. So we'll move to the recommendations. (2.1) Note the activities undertaken by each outside body since appointments were made in 2022, where representation has remained stable for 12 months as outlined in Appendix 2. And 2.2, agree whether any of the current active appointments should continue following review of Appendix 1, or whether any outside bodies should be removed from the scheme of outside bodies. Happy for that? Thank you. We'll move to item 8, Community Payback Order Annual Review. The report offers background and context to the Justice Social Work Community Payback Order Annual Report 2021 to 2022. It highlights particularly noteworthy aspects of the report and demands placed on justice social work during that year in comparison with other local authorities across Scotland. And Catherine Knipe is available to answer any questions. Thank you, Catherine. Members, I open the floor to you. Councillor Darwood.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I'd just like to say how fantastic that is. We've been having a morning of reports that have been quite challenging to deal with in terms of how we resource and fund services, and I know there are challenges in justice services as well. But you've all done a great job. So from a Labour Group perspective, I'd like to highly commend the job that you've done, continue to do, and hopefully will do in the future. And also from a Dumfries and Galloway region perspective, in terms of where you are on it's not a league table, but where you're at, maybe it is a league table, I don't know, but unofficially a league table. The results are fantastic in terms of the size of the region and the size of the staff resource. And I just want to comment that myself and Colin Smith, MSP, visited the Community Payback Facility in Annan last year. And it was absolutely fantastic to speak to the team, but also to speak to the service users and get their perspective, because, it isn't just about the staff, it's very much about the staff, it's also about the people that use the service. And they were absolutely so complimentary of what was going on there and what they can do. And I do know, as a little punt here, that we did discuss very briefly expanding that and having a different location as well. So whilst it's not something that I'm pushing for, it might be something that we could look at going forward and maybe take off the table and look at that in terms of allocation somewhere else. There's really a great deal of enthusiasm about that in terms of community payback in different locations, not just in Annan, but the Annan one's fantastic. So just, well done on that one. And a small question at the end, 4.4.4 vacancy issues. Again, put a little bit of a downer on it, sorry, but it is there in the report. How do you propose to again, what are the blockages and the challenges there in terms of addressing the vacancies? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Linda. If I could bring Catherine in, thanks.
Sure, thanks. Good morning, members, and thank you, Councillor Dorwood, for those very positive comments. They are completely appreciated, and also open the invitation to come and visit any of our premises across the region and come and see what it is we do, because I think you'll get some pleasant surprises, I would like to think. In terms of the challenge indicated in the report in terms of recruitment, the challenge that we face in justice social work, we have far fewer vacancies than across social work in general. What we experienced during COVID was that a number of our experienced workers left. So whilst we were in the main able to replace those workers, it was inevitably with workers who had less experience. So certainly the workforce development plan within justice social work that certainly complements the social work wide one is just to make whatever efforts required to upskill the staff group that we have at the moment.
Thank you for that. Are you happy with that, Councillor Darwood? Councillor Stevenson, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Like my colleague, Councillor Dorward, I actually attended the community payback, but in my own ward in North West Dumfries a wee while ago. And at 4.5.2, we talk about the amount of community payback orders that have actually been given out in Dumfries and Galloway. And I remember during my visit we spoke quite long on the subject of, and I want to say it's a Caledonia project, yes, which is where some of the orders are given to address things like domestic abuse. And one of the things we discussed was, and something that really we should be looking at, is how we actually stop people getting there in the first place. And one of those is how we develop this through education. Has there been any development on that? Because I'm actually quite passionate about it. If all you've ever seen is domestic abuse, then, you know, of course you think that's normal. So how do we get that to that point where we're preventing that as opposed to handing out community payback orders in the first place? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stevenson. I'll pass you on to Catherine.
Thank you. Very good question, and certainly it can be argued that by the time a man is sentenced to a CPO with a Caledonian programme requirement, the damage has been done, and our efforts are there to prevent any future. In terms of what impact we can have at an earlier stage in men's lives predominantly, certainly there are a number of partnerships within the council. There's the Violence Against Women and Girls partnership, there's the Community Justice partnership, where all the relevant partners sit. And certainly, I think that question was raised, I think perhaps at one of the area committees. And on the back of that, I've certainly raised it with the chairs of both of those partnerships. So certainly more than happy to play the justice role within that, but certainly the wider partners' responsibilities certainly key there, particularly in terms of education, as you suggest.
Thank you for that, Catherine. I'd also like to bring Alison in on this one. Thank you.
Councillor, specifically in relation to the point that you raise, schools are really good now at ensuring that relational practice, the rights agenda, is threaded throughout the work they do, specifically through their PSE provision. However, one of the most successful initiatives that have been developed in schools in Dumfries and Galloway is the Mentors in Violence Prevention. I'm not sure if any of the elected members have heard of that. So this is where we train 6th-year pupils to work with all of the other pupils in the school, to counsel, to mentor, to lead. And again, it comes back to not just domestic violence in relationships, but respect and rights in all relationships. So that would include bullying, it would include domestically violent or abusive behaviours, and that's about peers learning from peers, because we know from research that that will have much more of an impact than if the teachers are presenting it or if outside agencies even are coming in to prevent it. So I'm sure the Education Committee, or indeed if anybody wanted any more information, these mentors, 6-year pupils, present to the assemblies. They engage with children in the corridors at break times, and it is all about setting that culture of rights respecting relationships. So if anybody wants any more information, we can get some on that.
Thank you for that, Alison. Councillor Stevenson, would you like to come back in?
Oh, I don't know what's happened to my thing there. Yeah, no, that's great to hear. You know, as parents, we're always very much aware of, you know, our kids have been locked in during COVID with YouTube, and we hear all the different opinions we wouldn't like to be very popular that have managed to influence some of our children, and then obviously the generational domestic violence issue as well. So it's good to hear, and you know, I'll keep pushing that point from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other members have any questions? No. Councillor Ingalls, was that a hand?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question around outstanding CPO hours. When we were coming out of COVID, there was quite a large number of hours outstanding, and the Scottish Government wrote off about 25%, I think was the figure. I can't just remember exactly. But it was still quite a high number of outstanding hours. There's no mention of what outstanding hours there are within there. So I'm just wondering whether we can get an update on that and how we're managing to cope with that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ingalls. I'll bring Catherine in.
Thank you, Councillor Ingalls, for the question. It's interesting that the label that is given is in terms of outstanding hours. At any given time, we will always be managing the number of hours that have been imposed. And in terms of where we are at the moment, that is sitting approximately something like 25,000. But that returns us to the figures that we were managing at any one time before the pandemic. So I would say, from my perspective, whilst reluctant to say we don't have outstanding hours as such, the number of hours that we are currently managing is back to the levels we had pre-COVID, if that makes sense.
Is that okay, Councillor Ingalls? Would you like to come back in?
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I know that COVID, you know, sort of put a lot of pressure on this system, and it was difficult to get those hours. It was difficult to manage those hours, and the Scottish Government, as I say, intervened and took 25% of them away. But it's good to know that we're back down, because I think, if I remember correctly, it was up about 33,000, you know, as we came out of the COVID pandemic. So it's good to know that we're beginning to manage it. Do you see that being the sort of level that it will always be at, around that sort of figure, or is it likely to drop?
Really, the kind of mid-20,000s is the normal that we would expect, in terms of, obviously, the court will impose a number of hours with an order, and clearly it takes us the period of the order to work through them. So there will always be a significant number of hours that are currently in the system to be worked, but that's standard operational procedures, really. In terms of, given that we like numbers, looking at the period of 21 to 2022, I did a quick tally before I came, and we completed 31,000 plus hours of unpaid work during that year. And given that that was at the beginning of that period, we were still experiencing some of the restrictions from the pandemic, I think that's a good number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Would any other members like to ask? No? Okay, we'll go to the recommendations. So at 2.1, note the completion of the requirement to submit a report to Community Justice Scotland as outlined in Appendix. 2.2, note that the statistical information given in significant and ongoing demands placed on the Social Work Services Justice team. And 2.3, note the positive impact of community payback on service users, unpaid work, beneficiaries and wider community. Are members happy to note? Thank you. We'll move to item 9, workforce planning. This report provides progress made under the Social Work Services Workforce Plan, and several significant projects progressed and completed during the last 6 months as noted at 4.3. Further discussion will take place on the workforce plan at the elected members seminar scheduled for January the 16th. And I'd just like to draw your attention to the implementation of the social work Care is Great, which opens up opportunities for more of the workforce to enter the profession, and due to the parity of pay with formal roles. I'm really, really proud of the service and all of the staff, as I'm sure all elected members are, and the progress that they're making with the difficulties in recruitment of qualified social workers, and their wonderful way and scheme that they've put together of making sure that we still can have staff in those positions who, do have qualifications and who have training opportunities. So I just wanted to bring that point to committee, because it's been a lot of hard work, and it's a fabulous scheme, a fabulous way for Dumfries and Galloway to be moving forward with social work. So thank you. Do any members have any questions on the workforce plan? Councillor Jameson.
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones, Stephen. On page 120, how are they going to achieve this in terms of the encouraging people to come into the workforce? You don't mention schools. It's probably inferred, but from previous experience and with Skills Development Scotland, etc., one of the issues was young people not understanding. In my experience, it was agriculture and forestry. They didn't really understand what was all involved, the opportunities that are there. Secondly, through both my kids doing humanities at university, again, a lot of kids take a unit in sociology as part of a combined humanities, but not so many actually go forward to social work as such. So it's making it maybe clear to children at school the potential in social work, what it entails, just defining it a little bit better, because there's a severe lack of knowledge across all of Skills Development Scotland work and my world of work. It doesn't go into the detail to actually motivate children. This could fit for me. I've got another question on the same theme. On page 126, you mentioned Kickstart. Again, I was involved in Kickstart, and it was, from memory, it was a Westminster scheme. It was brought in at COVID, and it was to try and encourage people out of work, etc., to find work. It didn't work that well, but some of the sort of serendipitous initiatives beyond Kickstart have been useful, but Kickstart needed training before they went to work and things like that. The first question is Kickstart still a thing? And if you're working with Kickstart, is it a derivative of Kickstart?
Thanks for your questions, Councillor Jameson. I'll pass you on to Jamie to pick that up. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me. I can answer both, hopefully, to help you, Councillor, as we move forward. If we take the Kickstart first, so there is a new version of that is currently been worked through the council. The council's been, and elected members have been very supportive of both Kickstart and what's called Placement Plus now. So I think it went to E&R committee 2 or 3 months ago, where again there was surplus money left over from the Kickstart, and that was again put back in Placement Plus. So they're looking at about 30 placements coming into the organisation across various services. So again, you touched on it there about the training, initial training. So there is quite a bit about induction, training, getting work ready. I think that's the main point here, about trying to get them work ready for obviously the council, but wider region, which I think is more important for us as we move forward. The other bit about young people, it's quite good timing. So yesterday we were at the bridge with the DYW, had organised an event, so a Bridge to Your Future. So the council were there represented, so it was Dumfries schools, all S4s, S5s, S6. So again, there was a lot of industry there, a lot of organisations there, but the council were there and very much trying to get social workers, teachers, other professions right as early as we can. we're also, I'm personally going to Wallace Hall Academy tomorrow because we're doing S2s, would you believe? So there's something happening there at Wallace Hall, and one of my colleagues is going to Dalbeattie next week. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying here about young people, and we're out there trying to sell the council and the variety of posts and roles there are within the council, because it's an exciting place to come and work, as we all know. So hopefully that helps some of your questions.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Are you happy
really
with that,
encouraging,
Councillor Jameson?
Yep, sorry. Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's really encouraging. Good stuff. Just one supplementary question you brought up. Is Kickstart still available for employers out with the council, and how well is that known? Because, as I say, we used Kickstart in the agricultural industry. The big problem was young folk that are out of work, etc., etc. I've had difficulty. It's very difficult to put them on a farm or a forest and stuff like that without good induction. And we worked with SRUC to give them some sort of induction in health and safety, things like that. But the principle of the scheme is excellent. It's how we support employers, and as I say, in relatively big organisations such as the council, it's much easier. I know through working with DYW, they got a lot of uptake from big organisations, but for smaller businesses that are dominating in Dumfries and Galloway, it was a bigger challenge, and it's a missed opportunity, because there are a lot of small enterprises out there that could help young people that are having difficulties, sort of thing. But is it open? Is it still working? Is it still effective? I'll pass it back.
Thank you for that, George. Could you just turn your microphone on? Thanks, and I'll pass you back on to Jamie. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, I might have to go and ask a friend on this one, because we were both an employer and a gateway. So the council were a gateway through employability and skills. So I'll need to go back and ask a colleague if that's okay in regards to that question. But certainly from the employer side of it, which the council were, and that's where the Placement Plus comes in as the employer aspect, then absolutely 100% we're going forward. External to the council, as I say, I'll speak to Lynn Burgess and come back to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just as we're talking about young people, David, I've made film of the event, so you'll be able to see yourself. The other one was the Oasis with the youth elections, the youth elections, and it was really good to see all these young people putting themselves forward for the youth government elections. It was, I hope you don't mind, but the fact is, I think that you were talking about children today, and I think there's a lot of great children out there, and they'll have great futures into the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for your comments, Councillor Slater. I know a number of elected members attended various different events, and I know that social work play a massive part in supporting youth work in Dumfries and Galloway. They work very well collaboratively together. So thank you for highlighting that. I'll just bring Stephen in quick.
Around some of the things that we're trying to do, and in this workforce plan, Councillor Hill has quite rightly promoted the Grow Your Own initiative as part of the social work career grade, but linking to the previous report as well, where we are developing an advanced practitioner locally, which we haven't had for quite some time, like over a decade, and that means our top line pay doesn't compete with our neighbours, but with introducing the advanced practitioner and having social work's coming at the lower end of the grade, as it were, from a financial perspective, we can balance our books in the context of the previous conversations around finance, and we're going to be introducing that very, very soon as well. So that means our frontline staff are more likely to stay than go and get higher salaries elsewhere, but also in terms of bringing other people into the region, which was a specific point, Councillor Dorwood, you asked earlier. This will also make us, put us on parity with our other competitors in relation to social work staff coming into the service. So I'd really like to congratulate everybody sitting on the bench over there in relation to how they've progressed that work. So I didn't want to lose sight of the fact that you asked that question earlier on.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I'll bring Councillor Ferguson in.
Thanks very much. I mean, this is basically good news. I suppose the only question I've got, and I know it was in the original paper, and this is a paper telling us how you're then going to go about doing stuff. Yeah, I get that. Can you just remind us, what's the percentage of the social work establishment who are not social workers? Because we know that we know, Jamie and the likes, is that we're looking at all the professions and all the qualifications that people have who are working in the social work team. They're not unqualified. They've just got a different qualification. And it'd be just interesting to find out where we are with that.
I'll bring Stephen in for that one, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson. I was looking to my right for support and being told that we don't necessarily have the specific figures for all areas of social work, but we do have some. So I'll pass on to Alison and Jamie in a second or two. But what I'd like to say here is, when we speak about social work, when I speak about social work, I also mean social care, because you can't do work without care. And nationally, the Scottish Social Services Council, who are responsible for the registration of all social workers and social care workers, the vast majority of people nationally in social work and social care are in the social care element. So less than 5% of registrants are qualified social workers. Now, that's not quite the data that we have across the whole of the system, but if you think about care at home, you think about care homes, which have been referenced today, vast majority of staff are employed in the care field. Around some of the team issues in relation to what we class as our social work, so the professional function teams, Alison, Jamie, do you want to give an update on the percentages there?
Councillor Ferguson, from a children and families perspective, 55 to 60% of the workforce would be senior family support workers, which would be our not registered social workers, as part of the mitigating factors in relation to our placement provision. Currently, the range of staff we would be looking for would largely come from non-social worker staff, because we recognise that in Dumfries and Galloway we can recruit exceptionally skilled, talented and competent workers to do that level of work. So it is still social work, even though these people would not be registered as social workers. So it's a high percentage, and they're a hugely valued component of our workforce.
Thank you for that, Alison, and I'll just bring Jamie in and then Rebecca. Thanks.
It's probably just a takeaway for me again, I think, because E&R, we had the establishment check that went up there, Councillor Ferguson, 21st of November, so there's quite a bit of detail in there on metrics and staff profiles and numbers and whatever, but nothing specifically to the question you've asked there, but I'll take that back as well, I think, as something to add for future. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to add to that, we're also in the middle of doing some work with our in-house services and within social work as well, just to try and understand the amount of staffing that we have, where those staffing sit, what their qualification is, etc. And this is really just to lead in and to support the work we're doing around about workforce development, etc. Because what we do understand is that, as has been noted, that a lot of people within the social care setting, including myself many moons ago, actually then go on to a career in social work. So we absolutely value all of the workers within the sector, not just the qualified workers, and we see it as one of our huge priorities is to bring people into different areas of the workforce. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Is that okay with you, Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I'm pleased that Becky actually brought that forward, because she's the beacon light, of course. She's the, I would suggest, we've been really successful. We grew our own, but Rebecca, I think, is the one who's reached the highest level in the senior management team. She's the example to the rest. There are opportunities in the Dumfries and Galloway. And I know she'll be probably blushing right now, so sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I think she is, but that's a very good point, so thank you for bringing that up. Councillor Young.
Thank you for letting me in. I'm absolutely delighted to hear so much progress seems to be made in making our youngsters in the region interested in care, whatever form, social care, social work, etc., as a career. My concern is that these youngsters leaving school are restricted by the minimum wage of what is it, about £14.80 at the moment for a 70-year-old. I'm asking, can Dumfries and Galloway Council enhance these rates, or are they stuck with the government rates? And the other point I mentioned earlier was, although the IJB are separate to Dumfries and Galloway Council, are they also being involved with perhaps their care staff and letting them know this social work training may well be available and to consider it? But it's more a wages thing. I mean, we've got Aldi coming into Castle Douglas next year, £14 an hour, we were told. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Young. I'll just pass you over to Stephen for some comments, and then Rebecca, I think, wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Young. And one of my colleagues to my right will know the exact figure for the minimum wage, but it's less than £14.80 per hour, significantly less than that, especially for young people. In relation to the council response to that, we do obviously have the single status agreement that bans all of our salaries, and we use those appropriately for anybody coming into the service. In relation to the Health and Social Care Partnership and how they link in, I'll pass it over to Rebecca to respond to that, if that's okay.
Thanks, Stephen. Just again to offer reassurances that it is a collaborative approach in terms of working together to identify staff in different areas and to look at how we enhance arrangements for them to progress through career development, etc., etc. So it is just to offer that assurance that absolutely the Health and Social Care Partnership, as you would hope, are working collectively with us on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Are you happy with that, Councillor Young?
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Do we have any more speakers? Oh, David Slater. Thank you.
Yes, just to say the wage is much lower than that. It's £11 something an hour, I believe, because I know someone that works in Asda and they're just 18 years old and they're on a college course, but they get paid something like £11.30 an hour, round about that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Slater. Any other speakers? No? Okay. Thank you, members. We'll move to the recommendations. Our members are happy to have the review of the progress made under the Social Work Services Workforce Plan as set out in the Social Work Services People Delivery Plan 2022 to 2025 through the Action Plan updated in the appendix. We agree. Thank you. Item for 10, the Public Protection Committee minute of the 22nd of August 2023. This item's for noting. And on that point, I'd just like to bring Stephen Morgan in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And at the last Social Work Service Committee, I think it was Councillor McFarlane who asked why the minute from the Public Protection Committee is so old. And the reason for that is it only gets approved by the next cycle, so we can only actually see the approved minute as opposed to a draft. And that had actually completely slipped my mind at the previous committee, so that's the update. And the other question in relation to that is why there had been no elected member representation at previous committees, and that was an administrative error in relation to them not having been invited. But I can confirm that both councillors, Howie and Drysdale, attended the development session recently. Unfortunately, there's a clash of dates today where the Public Protection Committee had been put in well in advance and this committee kind of overlaid, so none of the professional staff are there in relation to myself, Rebecca or Alison, but we have representation through Gordon Pattinson, and obviously Councillor Howie is attending there instead of this meeting today. We will ensure that that type of clash does not happen in the future.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I think Councillor Ferguson would like to come in with a comment.
No, thanks, Chair. Stephen, thank you for answering the question. You obviously get into my head sometimes. Yeah. It was the issue about why they're on the same day. But thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor Ferguson. So we'll move to item 11. Any other business? And I have no other business. So thank you for your attendance and participation today. I'm sure I'll see you all at full council, but I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, particularly everybody in social work and all the hard work that you do, because I know you don't get much of a break over Christmas and New Year. So hope it's a good one. You do manage to get some rest, and thank you for all your hard work. Thank you.
Happy Christmas.